My name is Julie Kim, and I'm based in Los Angeles. I attended UCLA, then dropped out, and then transferred to USC. Got a lot of hate comments from my friends back then. And then I went on to Harvard Graduate School of Education to study education, specifically help understanding how I can help and mentor middle and high school students with their college admissions journey, as well as with their mindset. I think that's very, very important. And so as of now, I've helped more than 500 students get accepted into their dream colleges. And to be honest, my focus is really to talk about self-help and mindset, as I've dealt with a lot of self-identity crisis, not knowing what I really wanted to do with my life, feeling not good enough, not smart enough, not pretty enough, all of those things I've experienced in high school and even a little bit in college. And so I really want to help students navigate their high school years in the healthiest ways possible. And so that's what I do, and that's what I do. And I'm really glad to speak with you to talk a little bit about the recent scandal. But if you could tell us about what you do and who you help, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, sure, Julie. Thanks for partnering with me on this collaboration. I think it'll be a lot of fun. So for those who don't know me, my name is Steve Schwartz. I host the College Admissions Toolbox podcast. I've been a professional college admissions consultant for over 10 years now. And my journey really started back when I was applying myself. Columbia University was my dream school, and I ended up getting in. And once I did, even though my test scores and GPA were a bit below the norm, the reason I got in was really, I attribute it to my extracurricular activities. I ended up going to a United Nations conference in South Africa the summer before my senior year of high school. And then I wrote about it for my college essay, and my letters of recommendation were from diplomats. And so it was just a really compelling, unique story that I think got me in. And then I ended up being featured by Cal Newport in his book, How to Be a High School Superstar. And so that's one of my claims to fame. Yeah, really. Yeah. So that's—
No way. I love Cal Newport.
Yeah.
Let me show you this.
Yeah, Deep Work. Yeah, that's one of his more recent ones. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. And I have other books that he's written, but wow, that's so cool.
Yeah, he's amazing. I love him. And so, yeah, he was looking to highlight something that I've lived my experience, which is, how do you, rather than being a jack of all trades, master of none, how do you pick something compelling to craft your story with? And how do you create a space for yourself to compete in that others might not even know about or might not even exist before you create it? He calls it the failed simulation effect, where other people can't even imagine how you would achieve something like that. And so that's what I help students do. I help them craft compelling extracurriculars from scratch, from the beginning, and then orient their applications around that. That's what I love to do. That's my passion, turning that real world experience into the written word for essays and letters and such like that. But the topic for today, of course, is this recent scandal that's been making the news. And so I thought, given this timely event, and both of us working in the field, Julie, I thought it would be good for us to sit down and kind of just walk through this. What happened? Why? What does it mean for families applying today? So you want to quickly summarize your understanding of the scandal? Maybe I'll fill in any missing pieces I might see.
Yeah, so I honestly didn't dive in too deeply. I know about it, and I've read articles about it. And what I know for certain is that families with money, families with power, families with connections are bribing their way into prestigious and elite colleges. And they are saying that there are 50 people that are currently involved, but expecting that there will be more. And they're also trying to figure out who else was a part of this, because it started approximately 2011, according to Forbes. And so they're thinking, what are we going to do with the students who are already graduated from college using this route? And what about the students who already practice like medicine or law who went through this route? So what are we going to do with that? And some of the schools involved, USC, my school, is involved.
Oh no.
Yeah, and as well as a couple of the other Ivy Leagues. And another thing that I know for certain is that a college consultant was involved, and he was sort of like the middleman, bribing the test prep centers or the people who were watching over the students take exams. And so there was that. I also know that some students were able to take the SAT or ACT test with longer periods of time. So I feel like the benefits that the students received from this ride varied. It wasn't just, okay, this is one way, this is the way that we're going to get you in. It required a lot of minor actions, and it was sort of like a domino effect that happened. So yeah, if I'm missing anything, feel free to fill in, Steve.
Yeah, I think that was a great summary, Julie. I think that you're really capturing the scope of how big this was. Yeah, 50 people. I think there were hundreds of millions of dollars in bribes involved because, of course, these were rich celebrities and such. But from what I could tell, it seemed like it had two specific parts, and you touched on one of them, which was the SAT and ACT proctoring, where they would bribe the proctors to get special testing situations, or maybe even the proctors would change the answers for the students. I remember reading one case where the student might have deserved like let's say, just to put it on the 2400 scale, like an 1800, they might have deserved that, but the proctor, unbeknownst to the student, would change the answers to give them maybe a 22 or 2300. So the student thinks they deserve that score, but it was really the parents orchestrating it behind the scenes. So that was one side of this with the test prep. Then the other side I was reading a lot about was the athletics, because athletics are kind of this hazy, mysterious backdoor for admissions where people may not have the academic credentials, but the school wants that kid to be on the rowing team or the fencing team or something else like that. And so kids who didn't even play that sport were getting accepted as athletic recruits because the parents were, again, bribing the coaches. And maybe a coach gets 10 freebies a year. And so the coach would maybe allocate 5 of those to people who bribed for them, and maybe the other 5 got in fairly. But yeah, it does create this interesting situation where what can you do after the fact if it's going on 4, 6, 8 years later when they've already moved on with their lives? It's a tricky situation. You never know when these things can come back to haunt you, I guess.
Right. Yeah, I think you've touched up on the athletics part very well. And even like when I'm working with I have 2 athletes right now in my program, and we're both thinking like, okay, we need to really do this the right way. I mean, we are doing it the right way, but with the scandal, it's a lot more sensitive, making sure that when you do contact the coaches, that it is ethical, that we're really seriously reaching out to show how this student could contribute to that team. So it's definitely become a very sensitive environment for my students. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think a lot of families are concerned in a way because you already feel that it's such a hyper competitive environment and you want every advantage you can possibly get, but nobody really wants to have to feel like they have to do something unethical or immoral or just flat out illegal. Nobody wants to feel like they have to do that in order to have a fair shot. But we already live in this world where things are unequal. Not everyone has equal access to test prep courses or consultants like you and I. And so I think we have an obligation to help families feel like they do have a shot with what they already have in front of them. And then, as you said, we want to be careful if we're athletic recruits. We don't want to go to coaches and offer them a gift of some kind. And so I think even like a follow-up note that might have been accompanied by a box of chocolates or flowers or a small gift, maybe you want to be extra careful these days about giving something and maybe just leave it as a simple note.
Exactly. Yeah. One thing that really came up for me seeing the scandal is I've experienced a sense of inequity growing up. To give you a little bit of background, I immigrated to America when I was in 3rd grade. And so my parents, they didn't go to college in the United States. And so I absolutely knew nothing about it. I didn't work with a college consultant in the beginning. Later, I decided to get help with essays and whatnot. But at the beginning, I knew nothing of summer programs, like those pre-college programs and major specific programs. I knew nothing of them, and I couldn't even apply because first of all, it's really expensive. Second of all, I can't fly out there. We don't have those resources. And so in high school, I always felt a sense of oh, if I don't have money or if my parents don't have the power or the connection, then this game is hard. And I sort of felt that growing up. And even when I went to USC, a lot of the students that were my classmates were students who were in a club, like a business club, they were saying like, oh, my dad is a CEO of this and this and that. And I always felt like, oh, there we go again, like people who have money, people who have power, they just seem more confident. And I just always felt like I don't have that. And maybe that's where my like lack of confidence came from in the beginning when I said, oh, I'm not good enough and blah, blah, blah. And so, but at the end of the day, what I want to tell people listening to this and parents and students listening to this is that like those are things that we can't control, like people bribing other people, scandals, cheating your way into college. Like as a student going through the college admissions journey, like how can I control that happening, right? And so I think it's really important for listeners to understand like, what can I do within my control and within my thoughts that will get me closer to where I really want to go? And, what can I do to deepen my interest a little bit more? What can I do to really show colleges that I have the capacity to get in and that I'm really passionate about what I study? And so I think we feel powerless when we see or hear scandals like this, like, see, like there's nothing that we could do about it. But there are people who do still get into college without the power, without the money, because they focus on what matters to them and what their values are. And I would say like an example would be me. Like I didn't have money. I didn't have connections, absolutely nothing. No summer programs in my college essay. And I know you're talking about how you got into Columbia without the best scores. And that was for me too. I didn't have the best SAT score, but I was really authentic with myself and who I was and what I would bring to the campus. And so I just want to say, like, let's not feel powerless. Instead, like this should be a wake-up call for us to be even more authentic with ourselves, Yeah,
I think you can use it as extra motivation in a way. Like things have never been fair. Things are never going to be fair. People always have unequal access. You have the institution of legacies, right? Which is maybe an unfair advantage of some kind, I would say. And so this is just yet another example of how deep that can go, how much money can bring you. But I mean, I think we all know that money does buy access. And given that, you have to find your own way to compete in your own space. And so that, like I was saying earlier, this idea of creating a compelling extracurricular or maybe doing something else with your application that can help you stand out in some way. But I think that it's kind of funny because as you were talking, it was just reminding me of how I often encounter families right before senior year when they're suddenly trying to get it all together last minute. And I say, well, we can't control the first 3 years of high school. Whatever your GPA is, that's done. Of course, the advice we always give people is start early, right? Start earlier, right. Start earlier. But people come to us later in the process, at least for me typically. And so then the question is, what do you do senior year to make a difference? What can you control at that point? Your GPA is already set. If you didn't do clubs earlier in freshman, sophomore year, you can't go back in time. So it's the same thing here. You just, whatever point you're at in your process, today is day 1 or day 0 even, you start now. And you do what you can to make the most compelling application for yourself. And I would say, ignore the news as much as you can. Forget the headlines. Focus on your family, your student, what you can do now in this moment. Right now, we're talking in March. You've still got 6 months before applications at least. And so there's plenty of time to start working on these things and just make the best possible compelling application for yourself.
Absolutely. You have months to add things or, to contribute to your resume and your application. And yeah, there is a lot of time. And don't watch the news. Like for me personally, I try not to listen to negative news or do like forcefully, try to intake news that's not really going to serve me in a good way. And like, what are you like not going to work on this application because there's a scandal? Like, are you just going to give up because this happened? Absolutely not. Right. So yeah, definitely. I agree with you. There's a lot of time to add things to your application that really demonstrates who you are. And like add to that, like be really authentic with your college goals, like, or why you want to go. Like yesterday I was talking with a student and he really wants to go to NYU because his dad went there. And so like he's going on a tour tomorrow. So I was asking him like, hey, like, why do you want to go to NYU? Like, what are the classes that interest you? Et cetera. Those why questions. And he was giving me like, oh, because the location is really good. You've heard this before, right? The essays. the location is great. It's close to my home, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, no, you can't say that. You know, you have to go in and find out like what classes seem interesting. What is it that NYU offers that other schools don't that really excites you, you know? So again, you have to be really honest with yourself in this process. And when you do that, I think you get better extracurriculars on your resume, to be honest, because you're kind of like, oh yeah, I'm really interested in this. And that's why I think NYU will be a really good fit. And so that's the reason why I'm going to be doing this during the summer, you know, instead of just saying I want to go because of prestige or name or, you know, all of that, which I feel like is the reason why this whole scandal it happened in the first place, because it's always about good school, good name. And it's sort of like I compare it to like an analogy, you know, like luxurious handbags or like really goody, like goods that are like luxurious. Like, I feel like sometimes we pay more money to get that. And in this case, this is our kids' education, which was a little bit, you know, hard to handle, but yeah, completely agree with you.
That's a great point, Julie. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought it. I'm glad you brought it back to around to this idea of prestige, because that is what drove this scandal in the first place. I mean, I got the sense that so much of this was the parents orchestrating things behind the scenes because the parents wanted their kid to go to the best possible school at any cost, and even when the cost was millions of dollars. And so,
right.
The student who said, you know, they wanted NYU, I think it wasn't so much prestige; it's just this, but it was still this idea of a focus on a school because of its name and because of associations that may not actually be relevant to the student in the end. I think doing your research, doing your homework, if you're getting obsessed with the rankings, you may actually instead find upon doing the proper research that a school ranked 25 is a better fit for your student than one that's ranked 15. You know, and the difference between school number 17 and school number 18 may be insignificant. A lot of schools are tied in the rankings, but also you're going to go halfway across the country just because there's a 1 point difference in the rankings when you know nothing at all about the school. It's crazy.
Absolutely. And I actually was that kind of a student. Just really going to be honest here. Like when I was in high school, I was like, it's UCLA or nothing. You know, it's because UCLA is a popular school, and in LA, I'm sure it's popular everywhere, but especially the area that I lived in was like UCLA or UC Berkeley or like nothing else. And I went because of its ranking, because of its prestige, and because of everything that people love the school for. And I dropped out. Like it was not a good fit for me. Like the classes that they offered had nothing to do with what I wanted to study. And I felt miserable at a place where I thought it was going to bring all the goodness in my life, you know? And so yes, like prestige is important for some people, and that's just your preference, you know, that's your values, but you need to combine that with like, how is this school, how is this major going to, you know, improve my life? How is this school going to inspire me? How is this school going to be a good fit for me in the next 4 years? So I think, that's a great point. And one more thing that I always say is like, you know, like some people are like, oh, Ivy League, like, why do you want to go there so much? You know, like, but I feel like that's a matter of preference. Like some people want to go to Brown because they love that there's that prestige aspect, but more importantly, they love that they have an open curriculum, and they love the fact that Brown focuses a lot on discussion and debate, and they're, you know, and that's why it's a good fit. And so I just wanted to like mention that because I feel like some people just hate on Ivy Leagues altogether. And I just think it's just a different matter. It's a matter of preference. Just like everyone has different definition of what success means to them. Like for some people, it could mean, oh, if I own an Audi or Mercedes, and that to me is success. Whereas in other people could be as rich as them and own a Nissan, and that's totally fine too. You know what I'm saying? Like it just depends on your preference.
That's a great point, Julie. And I think that for so many parents, like this idea of prestige, it's coming from a good place. You know, of course, you want the best for your child, and the Ivy League has a certain cachet to it. And I think no one's truly immune to that altogether. But as you said, there are many differences between Ivy League schools and other top tier schools. And you want to look beyond just the Ivies, because there are many other great schools that don't fall within that outdated classification. There's Stanford, there's UChicago, there's UCLA. Those are all great schools that are not technically within the Ivy League. But then even within the Ivy League, Brown, which has an open curriculum, you can do whatever you want, versus Columbia, which has the core curriculum, which is completely different. A third of your classes are somewhat dictated from the very beginning. And someone who's pre-med might still have to read old works of literature, which may not be their thing. And so you want to know what's right for your student, because it's not just getting in is not the end. Getting in is really just the beginning of something else altogether. And that's going to be 3 to 4 years or more of your child's life. You want them to be happy and successful there, because once they get in, if they don't like the core curriculum at Columbia, or they don't like the open curriculum at Brown, they may not do well throughout those 4 years. And you want the GPA to be high as well.
Right. Yeah, especially if you're aiming for grad school, med school, law school. You definitely want to be at a place where you will get a good grade, because that is your proof of your time there.
Exactly. Yeah. We want students who are going to be happy and successful for all 4 years. And if you're thinking you want your kid to be a doctor or a lawyer, then there's that other thing to think about, where the brand name of the undergrad may not actually matter quite as much.
Yeah.
GPA matters more. So maybe you want to make sure your student gets the higher GPA at a school where you can save on financial aid, saves on tuition, and then you have that money for later, and your student is for success later if they go on to grad school.
Absolutely. Yeah. My friend was telling me he's a second-year resident now. And he was telling me how he didn't really need to go to Brown to be to go into med school. He sort of regrets that he could have went to a school that gave him a better foundation for med school, plus like a better GPA. And so, it really just depends on what your goal is, your personal goals, academic goals, and also your values. Absolutely.
It's so funny. I have a similar story as well. I have a couple of friends who went to Yale Medical School, and one of them went to Princeton undergrad. The other went to the City College of New York, like public university here in New York City. And so one of them paid like $50,000 a year, one paid closer to $10,000 a year, and they both ended up at Yale Med just the same. And so, those are things to think about. Absolutely, with school selection, prestige is not everything.
Yep.
Well, what else haven't we covered, Julia? Anything else we haven't covered on this scandal admissions topic?
Yeah, I know we keep going off topic.
No, it's good. We're bringing it back each time. I'm just wondering what else we should cover for this discussion on this. What other angles haven't we covered? Well, I guess there's the test prep side of it.
Yeah, we could definitely go into that.
Yeah, I'm wondering because there aside from like flat out bribing proctors, like there are certain things that a student may be tempted to do. I remember before this scandal, there was the one, I'm in New York, so I'm familiar with the scandal in Great Neck, Long Island, where there was one kid taking the SAT for several of his classmates, where he was like faking IDs and stuff like that to go in and take it for him. And that got busted too in the end. There's actually a really interesting 60 Minutes interview the guy who was cheating for the students. It's on YouTube. We should link to it. It's great. But he just walks through how he's like, I knew it was wrong, but I wanted the money. And it's like, people do get caught in the end. And there are so many different ways someone might try to game the system. But I think ultimately there are so many resources out there now for test prep that if you can just get your kid to put in the time, you could prep for free with Khan Academy. Like it's possible to get there on your own through hard work. I think it's just what I would encourage families to think about. And also remember that the test scores aren't everything. There are many components to the application aside from that. And so even if the test scores aren't measuring up, there are other things you can do. There are the extracurriculars. There is your college essay. There are the letters of recommendation. So there are many sides to this.
Absolutely. You don't need to cheat your way into getting a good SAT score. I recommend my students to use books. I have a couple of my favorites. Nelson Few, he's the author, and he wrote the book SAT Writing. It's a Panda series, SAT writing book. Really good. I've personally used it before teaching it to my students. I was like, goodness, this is like $20 and you could raise your scores by like 100 to 200 points in no time if you put in the work. And so, yeah, there's a lot of resources out there for you to raise your score. Now, I think when students do decide to, think that the SAT or ACT is not the right fit for them, it's because they think I'm not a good test taker. Like they've built some sort of like an identity for themselves. Like, oh, I'm good with GPA, but I'm not a good test taker. So you've built some sort of an identity. And when you build an identity, that's how you exactly will act. And if you think you're a bad test taker and you go in and take the SAT, then you will get a bad score, right? So students, I feel like this really goes under the core of like your grit level. Like, okay, you didn't get the best score on your first try. Well, what can you do in the next try to improve your score? Like, what is the type, like what types of questions you should miss the most, so that maybe you could tackle that first and see if that gets your score up a little bit more. And so it's very unfortunate to see students hiring people to take the test for them. Or another case that I saw through the scandal is they use like the testing. So they opt in for a longer test period. Right. And so I know a couple of my students have done that because they were diagnosed with ADHD and the like. And so, yeah, like using that as also an option. I just think that it's unfair for the students who really need that. And, like, it's just unfair that you get more time.
Of course. No, I think you touched on something that's becoming a bigger and bigger issue, which is the testing accommodations.
Yeah.
Because that's something where people find a doctor to diagnose their kid with ADHD. They pay thousands of dollars. They get it approved. They get the documentation. They can get 50% extra time, double time. And that's another thing where I think it's only going to grow. It's only going to grow. And that's a scandal that I think, unfortunately, is not going to be uncovered or undone, because who's to say what was a valid diagnosis or not? But I like what you said about, if you're not supposedly not a good test taker, like you can fix that. You can ID your weak areas. You can focus on them. That book you mentioned sounds like a great resource. We'll make sure to link to that too, of course. And I think that you can always retake. You can always give it another shot and go in with your best possible scores in the future. And you don't have to have a perfect score on every single section. If you're a math person, that's great. If you're more of a reading, writing person, that's also fine. Depending on your major, schools will understand.
Exactly. And, with SAT scores, like, I'm pretty sure you've seen it too. Like, your students who've gotten into Ivy Leagues and top tier colleges, like, I'm pretty sure some of them didn't have a perfect SAT score. Right?
No, I certainly didn't as well. And it's not like med school or law school where the numbers are so much of the application. For undergrad, it really is more holistic. They really do consider the GPA, the test scores, but also the extracurriculars, the college essay, the letters of recommendation, and so on. Like, there are many pieces that all play a role. The pie chart is divided pretty evenly. Right. It's not disproportionately on the scores. And so the scores might feel really important. And there's also the conflation between that and your self-worth and that and your IQ. And they're all unrelated. You can have a low score and go on to do many great things. There's plenty of people with perfect scores who can't even have a conversation with someone. It's like you have to be a well-rounded person.
Exactly. Yeah.
I typically recommend that students at least start test prep in their junior year so they have the chance to retake in the future if they need to. What do you typically advise on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Definitely, I have my students take their SAT test right after their sophomore year. So during that spring break, right before they go into junior year, if they did take Algebra 2 or pre-calculus for their 10th grade math. And so that's when I have them typically study for the test, because the thing is, when students do study for SAT during the academic year, they can't focus on two things at once. And they say like, yeah, I'm going to study, but your priority is always your GPA, and your priority is always doing well in your school and, working on your extracurriculars. That test prep gets pushed back. And then like 2 weeks before the test, they're like, oh my goodness, like I need to start studying for this. So I say, just work on one thing at a time. I love the book, One Thing. So just work on one thing at a time. And so that you only work on what's the number one priority for you at that moment. So my recommendation for my students is to take it right after the sophomore year summer break, study for 2 to 3 months intensively, take the August one and take the October one. But if they need the junior year to sort of finish it off with a better score, then junior year is the perfect time. Yeah, but definitely combining essays and college essays with test prep is not a good idea for sure.
On top of the academics too. So yeah, I guess it all comes back to this idea of starting early. And then, as you said, I think one
Yeah.
thing at a time. I really like that too. Well, we could go on and on, Julie, but I think that we've done a great overview of this recent news here and then tying it back to different parts of the application. Any other final comments you think we should share before we sign off?
Yeah. So to students and parents listening to this, like I said in the beginning of this conversation, don't feel powerless because of what you're seeing here. And know that if you are taking action steps early on, and if you are planning ahead, and if you are really focusing on what matters to you, so your values, your interests, your passions, then that genuine approach will always work out for you. Like, have you ever seen someone where they try so hard to be liked by you, right? And you're like, oh, like she's like trying way too hard, or he's trying way too hard. That's exactly what college admission officers think and feel when you submit an application that is fake, submit an application that is not really you. Sure, maybe some students, they will get it in the door, but at the end of the day, that's not really who you are. So I just want to encourage all students and families to feel confident and more powerful than ever, especially at a time like this, and know that if you are authentic and if you are genuine and if you prepare early, then you will be able to hit the goal that you want, whether that is getting accepted into Brown or USC or Reed College or wherever, So just wanted to send you all encouraging advice and encouraging advice.
That's a really great message, Julia. Thanks for sharing that. And I guess my parting words would be that things have never really been fair, and this doesn't really change that. It's yet another example, but I wouldn't overly stress about it. I think ultimately focus on what you can control, and you have, even now just listening in March, you still have plenty of time to make a difference, even if your child's GPA is low, even if the test scores aren't where you're going to want them to be. You still got the rest of junior year, the rest of the summer and beyond to make a difference for your child's college application success. Numbers do not tell the whole story, so you don't have to obsess over them. There are many other things you can work on as well. And don't overly focus on prestige. As we were discussing, find the colleges that are the best fit for your child. Don't just obsess over the rankings or the Ivy League. There's so much more than that.
That's wonderful.
And so, Julie, why don't you share for my audience the name of your podcast and the best way for folks to reach you?
Yeah, sure. So my podcast name is Demystifying College Admissions, and you can find them on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play. And we also have the show notes inside our website, juliekimconsulting.com. We also have a Facebook group, Concord College Admissions. And so that inside the group, I have Facebook Lives, share blog posts, and it's a community so that you can really go through this journey together with other families as well. So that's where you can find me. Where can we find you, Steve?
So thanks, Julie. So my podcast is the College Admissions Toolbox podcast, and it's at collegeadmissionstoolbox.com. And I basically have released weekly episodes. I have the show notes as well on the site. And another thing I have going on is also a community of sorts, a bit of a different one. I moderate Reddit's College Admissions Forum. So it's reddit.com/r/applying to college. And that's a pretty active, vibrant community with actually tens of thousands of applicants. It's really more for the students and the parents. So I would definitely warn parents before going in there. It can be a little crazy sometimes, but it's been a great resource for students to connect with each other and help each other out with their essays and such. Well, Julie, this has been a lot of fun. Thanks for connecting with me today, and we'll have to do this again sometime.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for sharing your insight and perspective, and let's connect soon.
Definitely. Take care.
Okay, bye.
Bye.